export would be a humanoid-appearing, usually female robot that can perform sexual tasks.
That's a very specific task that you're talking about there, but do we need in any other circumstances? Look, I've got a clip of concern raised for Alan Winfield, Professor of Electronic Engineering at the University of West of England, an expert both on the technology of robots and artificial intelligence, on the ethical issues it generates.
The problem here is that while robots are being designed to look increasingly human, we are, in my view, hundreds of years from developing the artificial intelligence to match their appearance. So making lifelike android robots that are not much smarter than a washing machine leads to unrealistic expectations. It is, I think, a form of deception. Robots are being built in Japan in the shape of baby seals for therapeutic use, for healthcare of young, elderly or other vulnerable people. Although for some applications, sure, surrogate pets could be great. I do worry about an emotional dependency that could be exploited. I really think we should consider introducing laws that regulate or perhaps even prohibit the development of lifelike and certainly human-like robots.
Well, Burkhard Schaefer, Alan Winfield is taking it a step further. I'm just dismissing the need for lifelike robots, but he's saying we should even ban them, and I suppose until they can be as intelligent as a human being. Would you agree with him?
Probably not at this point. There are three reasons really for it. There are certain restrictions on building lifelike robots that are already in place. So, for instance, if I want a robot that looks exactly like a celebrity for whatever nefarious purposes I might want it for, then there are things like trademark, right in your own image, all sorts of personality and copyright that are to be considered that will restrict the slightly creepy use of robots. The second point would be, well, if there is interest in this development, I think over-regulation might actually be premature. The danger that there is emotional attachment, that is right. But emotional attachment is something that we develop, unfortunately, as human beings, very often to objects. And the law more or less copes with that. The image my children paint for me has an emotional meaning for me. Our reaction to the danger that it gets destroyed is not to prevent children painting pictures.
No.
And then finally, there is one security aspect where I probably disagree with Alan the most. It is true that we have the tendency to project into these machines probably more than they actually could, because they look so much like a human, we think they can do more. At the same time, lots of the ways we interact is shaped by our experience with humans. So I know if you look in my direction, you see me, because I interpret your eyes, I interpret your facial expression. Now, if a robot doesn't have that, then I don't know in which direction the sensor points, I don't know in which direction it is likely to move. Lots of clues I have to avoid a collision are taken away from me. So by utilizing our acquired strategies to interact with objects, to know where they are looking, to draw the right type of inference, might make actually robots safer.
So, Lillian Edwards, this idea, I've been struck by this thing of developing a thing that looks like a seal, that may be there being an emotional support for a sick child or a sick older person, come to that. Is there a legal issue there that if that machine is turned off or malfunctions, that dependency has been created? Is it any worse than a child getting attached to a teddy bear, which happens to get thrown out?
Well, I think there are ethical and legal issues. I was just listening to Burkhard there and thinking that's all very well in a world of kind of autonomous, rational, choice-making humans. But care bots are typically used in environments with people, you know, in vulnerable circumstances, perhaps little or low capacity, such as children, geriatrics, Alzheimer patients, people in semi-comas, etc. That's typically where they're used. And I think there is a worry, because what no one has said so far, but it's a very familiar concept in legal robotics, is that care robots and any kind of personal domestic robot is very much a 24/7 surveillance camera. It's collecting data about you all the time. It has to do that because the learning data set it builds up is how it improves its performance and operates in these very subtle and nuanced ways. So I have worries, as particularly a privacy lawyer, that a deceptive robot, a cute seal, a cute penguin, is something that may encourage you to make the wrong decisions, or that may not alert you that it is gathering data about you every minute of the day. What if, for example, the cute seal encourages the child to take drugs that it's not really sure it wants to take? I can think of a lot of scenarios like that, which I don't think we've really fully investigated yet.
All right, Mark Deem, are you worried about the cute seal problem, or is it just a question of collecting data and being an assistant? It would be nice to think there were real nurses and doctors on hand as well.
I think what is really important is that we understand the role of the CareBot and what it is trying to do. Because it seems to me that there could be two very important roles that this CareBot could be performing. On the one hand, they could be responsible for administering care. And in those circumstances, the questions of the data it's collating, how it's been programmed, how it is functioning is obviously going to be very important. If, however, the CareBot itself is part of the medication and part of the treatment that is being delivered, then I think actually it can perform a very different role, and the liability that flows from that could itself be very different as well.
Well, since we're back to liability again, so if the machine goes wrong or makes a bad decision, to put it like that, then it isn't liable because it's a machine, but the person programming it or providing it, or the hospital, whoever, they could be liable just the ordinary way of any bit of equipment going wrong.
Exactly right, but I think there's a real danger here that when we look at the technology which is being designed to help us, that we see it in very absolute terms. Humans are capable of making mistakes in the same way as computers will malfunction or perform in a different way. And it's very important, I think, that we don't see technology as being sort of a cure for all ills, if you like, if you'll pardon the pun. But the idea being that can it make a better decision than a human in the same circumstance? And if healthcare is not provided on a 24/7 basis in close proximity to the patient, then the argument would be that a CareBot can provide better surveillance and better care.
I don't want to forget your second point, which is if it's being provided as therapy, so it's a cute thing or a charming thing. Is there any legal worry about that, or is that just another tool that can be used to help us?
I think the liability then goes back very much to the healthcare professional. Is it appropriate for that person to have provided the cutesy seal to the patient? If the seal then starts malfunctioning, is it right to take it away, or is it worse to leave a malfunctioning CareBot with the patient at that time?
Johnny Redden, can you see cases like this coming to court any time soon?
I can't see this kind of technology coming anytime soon. I think we've got a long way to go before we can come up with a seal that's sufficiently convincing to keep a 2-year-old entertained. But I think that we should really be looking at more of a macro focus rather than the micro-emotional context of an infant. We have an ageing population. The costs of providing aged care are higher than ever before. And if we can outsource some of the cost of that to automated intelligent agents, then why wouldn't we? Should be the question, shouldn't it?
Well, yes. I suppose people might be worried. It's not strictly a legal question, but you know, it'd be nice to think we're cared for by people rather than finding a way of creating a device which just saves money.
Absolutely, but at the same time, we would only really be thinking about these kinds of CareBots as providing a complementary tool to be used in conjunction with actual medical professionals. It may be a triage tool, or it may be a diagnostics tool, or a kind of overnight monitoring tool, but at the end of the day, or at the beginning of the morning, you're going to get a doctor that comes and checks the readings or has notifications overnight.
So we're coming back from artificial intelligence at that point. That's just an information-gathering device to help the human
It just so happens to take the form of an object which can be integrated into its environment and perhaps have more of an emotional bond with the patient, which might actually assist it to do its job.
But that's, I think, where it can become a legal problem and turn from a purely ethical or societal problem into a legal problem. Our courts increasingly have to defer to best medical practice, best practice of care, to the actual things that go on the ground when making certain types of judgments. So the mere fact that robots will be used to replace the human nurse can suddenly get, by a sort of recognition that is best practice, legal backup, legal weight. And that is something that does concern me to a certain extent, that we might prematurely replace the human carer by a machine. The trust is under financial stress. Everything that works will be thrown at the problem. And the court then simply observe what's going on the ground and decide, oh, well, if the medical profession already is using it this way, who are we as lawyers to interfere? And I think that's problematic. It ought to be a normative question that we decide as a society, do we want potentially less human interaction in our patients? Is this a price worth paying rather than something that is just left to the technologists working for a large NHS trust.
Lillian Edwards, the noises you're making, are they noises of agreement or disagreement?
I sort of want to add to that.
Okay.
I do feel slightly disturbed, I think, by what Gianni was saying, because this is already something that's happening. I mean, Japan has a very advanced technological culture and a very ageing population, and the combination has led to there already being much more extensive use of robots, mostly as home carers or via telemedicine. We're not generally talking about people being checked over in hospitals for a start. They're often at home. But the question is not whether we should do this, because I think inevitably we are going to, but how we should do it. And, you know, this is just very basic good practice for data protection. We should know what data is being collected. We should know why it's being collected. We should know how long it's going to be kept for. We should know who it's going to be shared with. Well, we should know, is it going to be given to medical insurers or to advertisers or to medical drug companies without...
The manufacturer of a carebot would already be obliged to do all of those things under the existing data protection regime.
Indeed.
I don't think that that's controversial in any way.
We're coming on to data, which I want to do anyway, and can I just say that you're listening to Unreliable Evidence with me, Clive Anderson, talking about the law and artificial intelligence with Professor Burkhard Schaefer, Professor Lillian Edwards, Mark Deem, and Gianni Riordan. So... You've mentioned, all of you've mentioned data collection and algorithms, and are pointing to these sorts of concepts as being vital to the understanding of this. So, and this is already with us, isn't it? Where our data is being collected on us the whole time by all sorts of organisations. So, should we be looking to more controls anyway before we get onto these artificial intelligence developments?
Well, there are many in Europe who seem to think so. The data protection regulation looks like it's going to happen later this year, and it does appear that we are moving in a direction of stronger, at least at a legislative level, stronger privacy protections within the European Union. That, of course, exposes a great rift in terms of where we should strike the balance between freedom of expression and free market on the one hand and data protection on the other.
So what sort of protection is going to be offered by new legislation?
Well, recently people have been talking about the so-called right to be forgotten, and this is a slightly different discussion, but one wonders how it would interact with the new sources of data storage and collection in AI and in robots and in driverless cars.
Yeah.
And whether one could be forgotten from such a pervasive data collection network, whether one would want to be.
Well, Lillian Edwards, you were coming on to this point as well. If there's something by your bedside collecting data on your, I don't know, your blood pressure, your temperature, and all the other aspects of you, do you want to have protection to stop? You want that to be collected and analysed.
Yeah, it is a very difficult one. The general theory of ubiquitous computing, which is partly what we're talking about, is that the more data that can be collected, the more these objects can learn, the better they can perform. And also there's a lot of evidence that they work best when they are invisible in the environment. The environment becomes this kind of pervasive Internet of Things environment where people aren't really aware that data is being collected about them. Unfortunately, this is in direct opposition to the basic idea of data protection, which most of us, I think, in Europe have signed up to, which is that we should know when people are collecting our data and we should have some control over it. So it is a very hard one, which I think, she says in a dull way, needs a lot of thought.
But are there any particular examples or cases you can point to where this has been tested?
Well, no, actually, but I was going to say that I worked on a big EU project about robotics, where I got paired up with an engineer in Italy that was indeed creating a care robot. And I asked him all these questions. Where is the data being stored? Is it in the cloud? Is it being thrown away? How much do you need to keep? Who gets to look at it? And he didn't know the answers to any of these questions because these engineers had never thought about it. Because in these projects, typically lawyers come in right at the end just to check that, no one's infringing a trademark